On today's World Insight, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is one of the fastest growing multilateral development banks by membership and capital investments. We have an exclusive with AIIB President Jin Liqun, who talks about the bank's growth, global and green ambitions.
I think one of the beauty of the multilateral institution is that you hold members together. You help them to see beyond immediate conflicts.
And here is our host, Tian.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. The Boao Forum for Asia 2023 annual conference wrapped up amid heated discussion on the theme of an uncertain world, solidarity and cooperation for development amid challenges. In the face of multiple challenges, what is the role of multilateral development banks? How can Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB, which just celebrated its 7th birthday, contribute to development in Asia and beyond? I talked to Jin Liqun, the president of AIIB, for his answers. President Jin, what a pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us out of your busy schedule. Now, talking about your job, president of AIIB, I have a few numbers to share with our viewers. 106 members from 6 continents, representing 81% of the global population, 65% of the global GDP. That's a lot of responsibility.
You know, I think perhaps I could say a little bit about the conceptualization of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the path it has covered over the last 7 years or so. It took us 2 years to complete the negotiation for the Articles Agreement. At that time, we had 57 founding members. But then, ever since the bank was up and running, we quickly grew to 106. So you could notice the 4 Gs of this institution: growth.
Yes.
Growth of the membership, growth of our lending program. And behind this, growth of our client countries. And then global, because we have regionals and non-regionals. 55 members are non-Asian countries. We're inclusive. We do not think Asia could sustain itself without close connectivity with the rest of the world, without integration with the global economy. Global also means we provide global public goods and services. Look at $13 billion of crisis recovery facility, which help a large number of countries to deal with COVID-19 and to strengthen their healthcare system. Governance. No institution in a modern world could be recognized, could get the support of the people without sound governance. Ours is a multilateral institution, and we govern by the international standards. Finally, green. We have already reached the target of reaching 50% of the approvals for climate change financing by 2025. We already have gone over 50%. 4 Gs, and based on the core values: lean, clean, green.
I see a lot of principle-based, a new development bank.
You're right.
Certainly you are. Having said that, though, I understand that the AIIB just had the first in-person board meeting after 3 years interval. But now it's a very complicated world. Just like the title of the Boao Forum theme suggested, it's uncertainty and layers of crises. So what does that mean for a young multilateral development bank like AIIB?
You're right. We had the first board meeting in person ever since the outbreak of the COVID-19. While people are elated and happy and pleased about the meeting together, seeing each other face to face, and talking to each other needs to need. But you see, I want to qualify this kind of enthusiasm and happiness because we did not stop over the last 3 years, even if we could not see each other. We managed to provide crucial financing to the countries hit by by the COVID-19, right? And even China, we provide financing to deal with COVID-19 earlier after the outbreak of this virus, and also we supported China in its efforts to deal with climate change. For instance, in Henan province, hit by once-in-a-century flooding, and we provided $1 billion, a single largest lending project, $1 billion to deal with the climate change. So there are numerous stories about that. And this time, Pakistan was hit by the flooding. Right. 2/3 of the territory came underwater. And Sri Lanka was also hit by the fallout of the COVID-19 and also some regional issues. But we never stopped working.
What is the biggest takeaway of that meeting for you?
The resilience of this bank. They recognize the commitment of the management and the staff to dealing with tough challenges. And of course, against the tough geopolitical background, there were lots of challenges which were not expected earlier on. And we managed to keep the members together, keep the board members together, and we think along the same line for broad-based and economic and social development in our members. So I think there's a high level of consensus. In sharp contrast, in the geopolitical tensions outside this institution, I think one of the beauty of the multilateral institution is that you hold members together. You help them to see beyond immediate conflicts, looking forward into the long-term vision. So this bank has a vision. The management and the board have vision. We are not visionless.
Having said that, though, you talk about China. You provide fundings to China's flood-hit areas. But there was suspicion always when it's China initiative. Ideas or projects, AIIB, of course, originally the idea was put forward by China, later rallied the support by the international community. I'm sure you encounter similar questions once and again every day in your work when people say, wow, AIIB, maybe you're too close to China.
This is a frequently asked question. The best answer to the questions about suspicions about major shareholders' roles in an institution is to see what the bank does. Okay. First of all, it will take some time for more people to understand what this bank is really about and how this bank is managed. And the way, for instance, to deal with the issue of whether this is a China bank, the answer is you look at what this bank has been doing. Once I had a meeting with some of the ambassadors, now one ambassador in Beijing, and they look at our balance sheets, they look at the lending programs, they look at the biggest borrowers from this bank. They say, wow, all this indicates this is apolitical, it's a multilateral institution which is really operating by the international best standards, because the list of the clients speaks volumes about this apolitical feature.
I've been checking on some of the latest projects that AIIB has been working on. Certainly your extent of support is beyond the national border and beyond the continent border. So it's, I guess, fact speaks for itself in a way.
This, actually goes back to the issue of global, G. one of the 4 Gs.
One of the 4 Gs.
Membership is global, and the products we provide is global public goods and services. Now, we had 2 breakthroughs. One, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank would certainly focus its attention on Asian countries. But its vision should not be confined to Asia only, for the obvious reasons. So this is global. Okay. And also, we do not have 2 categories of members. One is the so-called contributing members, donors. The other is recipients, beneficiaries. We don't have that. By Articles of Agreement, any member, regardless of your status, can have access to banks' financing. As for developed countries, OECD countries, they have a choice not to borrow so as to leave more resources for developing countries, which is noble.
Good
and
for them.
I applaud that, even though we do not think we should limit our financing only to a certain number of countries. But it's interesting to refer to China. China is the biggest shareholder. And China made it very much clear earlier on that China would not borrow from this bank because, as a biggest shareholder and initiated this bank, this should not be your ATM machine, right? And I respect that. But China may borrow in moderate amount for connectivity, connecting with Vietnam, Myanmar,
I see.
or Lao PDR, or Kyrgyz, Kazakhstan, something like that, Mongolia, right? So China reserves the right to borrow, but it is not supposed to be an active borrower of this institution.
I see. Right now, United States and Japan are still not members of AIIB. Is the door still open for them?
The door remains open. But, in order to help low-income countries, such as those countries which have temporary challenges, difficulties, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and some of the countries which need our urgent help. You will find the more we support lowest income countries, the average risk rating of the assets will go down. And eventually it will touch the bottom, so we cannot do anymore. So what we can do is to lend to higher income countries or higher rated countries so that average assets will go up. That's why I go to China and tell them, could you please lend us a hand? For the next couple of years, borrow from this bank. So the assets quality will improve. And we're not short of money, and this is your contribution, and the contribution comes from China, comes from India, or Indonesia, higher rated countries. We also work with Saudi and Egypt, and we are going to work with Brazil for the whole purpose of strengthening the financial position of this bank so as to be able to do more in risky countries. This is our strategy.
President Jin, on the other hand, what about that trap? There has been a lot of reporting about that trap, especially coming from China to other developing and least developed economies. Of course, some have been suggested. For example, former president of the World Bank, Mr. Kim, suggests these are total empty rhetorics against China. But I'm sure as a president of a multinational bank, you have your own interpretation of what exactly is going on.
You see, I started to work in the World Bank in 1980, the year when Mexico had debt crisis. And then in the 1980s and 1990s, you see a string of debt problems in Latin America countries, some African countries. So debt problem has been with the international community for the last 4 decades. I think what is most important is for us to learn from the lessons, right? China became a country with increasing amount of resources invested in other countries only probably after the turn of the century. China's support for African countries in the 60s, 70s, 80s certainly was noticeable, but in absolute amount it's still very much limited. So when you look at the history of debt crisis over the last almost half a century, there are lots and lots of lessons to be learned, and there are quite a number of debtors and creditors. So in my view, sitting down, talking to each other, trying to help them would be part of the solution.
And therefore, as a young multilateral investment bank like AIIB, have you ever thought about these the debt structures, for example, for some of the countries you are lending to? How would they be able to pay back? I'm sure you and your colleagues have been in constant discussion about this.
The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank enjoys AAA rating. And this is based on, first of all, the governance. It took us only 17 months to get the AAA rating without any track record. Now, how could we be given the AAA rating? First, they look at bank's governance. They look at the bank's standards. They look at the quality of the management team and our professionals. What kind of people you recruit? The bank itself has no track record, but each and every management team's member has good track record. So you have to reason to believe that when these people stay together, working under a very sound governance, you should have little doubt about its possibility of success. Just like a soccer team, in a World Cup, you have your people coming from different parts of the world, from different clubs, and then they have the national team. This team is newly formed, but you look at the individual players, you know, very likely they will do very well. Exactly the same. And after we got the first rating, everything's reviewed every year, right?
Right.
And we have maintained our AAA rating. And I told our management, when we will have the big celebration, I said, yes, we have something to celebrate. Please keep this in mind. AAA rating is not PhD degree. For a PhD degree, it stays with you for the rest of life. Even if from now on you don't read, you don't write, you do nothing. It's your PhD. This is not. We have to keep the AAA rating on a daily basis.
Well said. Talking about your projects, infrastructure for tomorrow, I for T, if I remember right.
Yes.
Yes. When we look at climate change and the way people are trying to address it, there are a lot of doubts. As a multilateral investment bank, how do you place your bet? Where do you see the hope is? How do you make sure that is exactly where the hope are?
You see, we have the corporate strategy approved by the board, and the strategy stipulates that by 2025, 50% of the approvals would be for climate financing. We achieved this ahead of schedule. And by 2030, 50% of the approvals should be for the private sector development. And we now 39.2%. And we have quite a number of years to go. So I have absolutely no doubt we would achieve both objectives. Now, let me discuss the climate change. It's very much important for us to do things on the ground in a concrete manner, down-to-earth manner, to avoid any perception or misconception of greenwashing. So each and every project we process must be firmly grounded in actual financing for climate change. We do not create opportunities for anybody to do greenwashing. This is very much important.
How to make sure of that?
To make sure that we finance the project which it directly addresses climate change. For instance, we finance renewable energy, solar panel, power plants, and we are also discussing with, for instance, Uzbekistan about rooftop, solar energy. And this kind of financing goes directly to the production of green, clean energy. No possibility, no chance for anybody to have the greenwashing. And when we, for instance, are working on the improving of the mass transit system, for instance, in crowded cities, in India, for instance, we can expect to reduce individual cars running on the ground. This is also clear-cut climate financing. And in the Henan project, I told you $1 billion for climate change mitigation adaptation. Please understand, COP26 to COP27 also give a strong message. Climate change mitigation and adaptation is important. Both are important. So if you design the project in such a way, there's no loophole, nobody could do this kind of greenwashing. But if you do something, people can manipulate, taking advantage of some of the loopholes in the green, for instance, carbon exchange market. That may happen. But as we discussed over the last 2 years here in Boao, everybody is conscious of this problem. We want to stop this kind of thing. And this bank was certainly is very much ambitious of playing a role model in this.
President Jin, my last set of questions about the financial difficulties and challenges we're experiencing right now with the collapse of SVBs and some of the local banks in the US, and of course Credit Suisse hanging in the air now, even though being merged by another Swiss bank. What do you see as the danger facing the financial industry? Of course, as a development bank, you are different from a commercial bank.
You're right.
But still, the ripple effects could be on everybody's head. So how do you see that?
Multilateral development banks are not deposit-taking institutions. In that sense, the multilateral development banks, we call MDBs, are immune from the immediate fallout of the bank failures. But we also understand that if the bank failure is systemic and it would be sweeping in its devastating effect, then of course the whole financial system would be affected and the funding cost would be going higher, and that would definitely impact on the multilateral development banks. But when I look at the recent failures, I think it's not likely that there would be the resurgence of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. I think could be quickly contained, and actually actions are taken by the governments concerned. But this also tells us a lesson. Financial system is something both strong and fragile at the same time. One moment, they could be very strong. Next moment, they could be deep trouble. And I think this applies to the financial institutions in both developed and developing countries. So there's no room for complacency. Since it's a developed country, has very strict regulation, nothing would happen, which is not true. Okay, developing countries should not be discouraged. Oh, we are a developing country, we don't have sophisticated financial infrastructure, we don't have a large number of well-educated, competent financiers. So we might be the first to be hit. That's probably the worries. this calls for close cooperation between developed and developing countries. So I think this tells us that financial safety or soundness of any country would probably have spillover effects, particularly the major economies in this world. What we want to do is to make sure that to do the best we can in raising lower cost funding from the market and then transfer all these resources to low-income countries. I think the problems are being addressed, and we watch very closely. And this also tells us how important it is for these MDBs to provide necessary financing for our clients, particularly in difficult times.
There are a lot of debates about US dollar and RMB yuan. Do you have a preference as the president of AIIB?
This bank mainly uses United States dollar, as the currency for transactions. And also we issue local currency bonds at the request of our shareholders. Some of these countries who have pretty deep market for local currency, we can provide the local currency to them. But anyway, we will do whatever we are asked for, and we will do whatever is needed.
President Jin Liqun, what a pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. My in-depth interview with Jin Liqun, president of AIIB. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of my team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.